Cincinnati, August 2026. Alex Eala walks onto the court as the number 17 seed, the highest seeding of her entire career at a WTA 1000 event. Behind her sits a season that most players wait their whole lives for. A first tour-level title in Washington, a top 20 world ranking, a crowd that follows her from country to country like she is already a legend. But rewind 2 years, same tournament pressure, same stage, a different result. August 2024. U.S. Open qualifying. A 21-year-old Alex Eala walks off the court having just lost in 3 sets. The scoreline reads 3-6, 6-1, 6-4. The player who beat her that day was Gabriela Ruse. That loss mattered more than a normal early round exit. It cost Eala her first ever appearance in a Grand Slam main draw. It sent her home while other players kept dreaming. For a young athlete trying to climb out of the middle of the rankings, that kind of defeat does not just disappear. It sits somewhere. It waits. Now, fast forward to today. Same 2 names on the scoreboard. Alex Eala, Gabriela Ruse. Except this time, Eala is not the one packing her bags early. She wins the first set 6-1. She races out to a 3-0 lead in the second. And then something happens that nobody in that stadium expected. Ruse cannot continue. She retires from the match with an injury. So here is the question worth sitting with for the next 20 minutes. What actually changed between that painful night in 2024 and this dominant afternoon in Cincinnati? Is this really the same Alex Eala who once walked off that court in tears? Or did something in her fundamentally shift along the way? Because a scoreline like 6-1, 3-0 does not happen by accident. And a 2-year gap between 2 matches against the same opponent tells a much bigger story than one afternoon in Ohio. To understand what really happened in Cincinnati, we have to go back much further than 2024. We have to go back to a place where nobody was watching Alex Eala at all. By the end of 2025, Alex Eala was ranked 53rd in the world. Not bad for a young professional, but not the number that turns heads either. She had never won a WTA Tour title. Not one. And Gabriela Ruse was far from the only name sitting on her list of painful losses. Renata Zarazua beat her once. Maya Joint beat her once. Iga Swiatek beat her. Zheng Qinwen beat her. Leylah Fernandez beat her. Jessica Pegula beat her. Alicia Parks beat her. 7 different opponents. 7 different matches where Eala walked off the court on the losing end. If you only looked at that list, you would assume this is a story about a player who struggles against the top of the game. A talented junior who never quite breaks through. That assumption would be wrong, and understanding why it is wrong is the whole point of this video. Because here is what almost nobody outside the Philippines knows about Alex Eala. Her tennis story does not start on a manicured academy court with private coaches and imported clay. It starts on a public court in Manila. A court made of crushed seashells. Rough, uneven, nothing like what you see on television during a Grand Slam broadcast. Her first coach was her own grandfather. The family calls him Lolo Bob. No fancy federation program discovered her. No scouting network flagged her as the next big thing. It was a grandfather and a granddaughter hitting balls on a seashell court with absolutely no guarantee that any of it would lead anywhere. That is the foundation this entire career is built on, and it explains something crucial about how Eala responds to losing. Most players who lose to the same opponent twice start avoiding that matchup mentally. They build a narrative in their head. This player has my number. I cannot solve this puzzle. Eala did the opposite. Instead of running from the names on her losses list, she started hunting them down again. One by one, she went back and beat the exact players who had beaten her before. Zarazua, Joint, Swiatek, Zheng, Fernandez, Pegula, Parks. Every single one of them eventually fell. 7 wins, 7 pieces of redemption, 7 proofs that a loss was never the end of the story for Alex Eala. It was simply unfinished business. Now here is where it gets interesting. If you are watching this and thinking that is a nice story, but that is exactly the kind of thing people say before showing you a fluke win, stick around, because what you are about to see in the next few minutes is not a feel-good narrative dressed up to sound impressive. It is a documented pattern, match after match, with real scores attached to it. And once you see the full list, you will understand why Gabriela Ruse was never going to be the exception. That is the version of Alex Eala who was building, quietly, away from the cameras, for years before anyone in the tennis world outside the Philippines was paying attention. And it is the exact reason why what happened in Cincinnati was not luck. It was inevitable. But before we get to that redemption, we need to talk about the darkest stretch that came right before it. Because 2 weeks before facing Ruse again, Alex Eala was not riding high. She was running on fumes, and there was a very real chance her best season ever was about to fall apart at the worst possible moment. 9 matches, 13 days, singles and doubles combined. That was the schedule Alex Eala was carrying on her back heading into the North American hard court swing. No rest weeks, no easy matches, just tournament after tournament, opponent after opponent, on a body that was already 21 years old and playing the most demanding tennis of its life. Let that number sit for a second. 9 matches in 13 days. Most casual sports fans have no idea what that actually does to a professional athlete. It is not just physical fatigue, it is decision fatigue. It is your legs feeling heavy on the exact point where you need them light. It is your focus slipping in the third set of a match you were dominating an hour earlier. And the price of that schedule showed up in Toronto. Eala walked into the National Bank Open carrying a 7-match winning streak. 7 straight victories. The best run of her career. She was playing with confidence, with momentum, with a crowd behind her that felt more like a home game than a tournament abroad. Then she ran into Belinda Bencic in the round of 16. The match lasted 73 minutes. Bencic won it 6-4, 6-0. Read that scoreline again. 6-0. A bagel set against a player who had just won her first career title weeks earlier. Not a close loss. Not a battle that could have gone either way. A statement defeat, delivered in barely over an hour, that snapped the best winning streak of Eala's career at the worst possible time. If you think that sounds like a crisis, you are right, because it raised a very uncomfortable question heading into Cincinnati. Was this the moment the fairy tale season finally caught up with her? Was the body simply out of gas? Here is something that made the pressure even heavier. It was not only Eala's own expectations she was carrying, it was an entire diaspora's. In Toronto, Filipino fans packed Sobeys Stadium so completely that Eala herself gave the phenomenon a nickname, Barangay Toronto. Blue, red, and yellow flags filled the stands. Tournament organizers even changed their food menu to include Filipino dishes because of how large and loud the crowd had become. That kind of support is beautiful. It is also an enormous weight to carry onto a tennis court. Every single point now means something bigger than a scoreline. It means representing a nation of over 100 million people who are watching, who are hoping, who have started to see themselves in this one 21-year-old competitor. So picture the scene right before Cincinnati. A player who just suffered her worst loss of the season, a 6-0 set included. A body that had absorbed 9 matches in 13 days, with almost no recovery time, and an entire fanbase whose emotional investment only grows heavier with every tournament she plays. Now add one more detail. Waiting for her in the very next tournament, in the very first match after that brutal Toronto exit, was a name from her past. Gabriela Ruse, the exact player who had ended her Grand Slam dream 2 years earlier. Think about the psychology of that draw for a moment. You are exhausted. You just got embarrassed on a big stage. Your confidence has taken a hit at the worst possible time, and the tennis schedule, almost cruelly, hands you the one opponent who already knows how to beat you. The one player who has already proven she can find a way to win when it matters. If this were a movie script, this is the exact scene where the underdog is supposed to crumble, where the pressure, the fatigue, and the painful history all combine into one final collapse. A tired champion, a familiar tormentor, and a stadium full of people hoping for a miracle that logic says should not happen. That was the setup walking into that Cincinnati court. Not a confident favorite cruising toward an easy win. A player who had every reason in the world to lose again. And for one game, it actually looked like the story might go that direction. Game 1. Eala drops her own serve. Ruse takes the early lead. For a brief moment, every fear from the last section of this story feels justified. The fatigue, the pressure, the history against this exact opponent. It all seems to be showing up at once, right on cue, right when it mattered most. And then something shifts. Eala wins the next 6 games in a row. Not close games either. She breaks Ruse, holds her own serve, breaks again, holds again, over and over, until the set is gone. Final score, 6-1. Total time on the clock, 34 minutes. Read that again. 34 minutes to win 5 out of 6 remaining games against the one player who had already proven she could beat Eala on a big occasion. That is not a nervous performance clinging to a lead. That is a systematic dismantling. Set 2 continues exactly where Set 1 left off. Eala breaks early, holds serve, breaks again. She races out to a 3-0 lead, capped off by a backhand winner that had the crowd inside that stadium on their feet before the ball had even landed. Here is what makes this moment different from a normal good day at the office. This was not a player getting hot for 20 minutes and riding a wave of luck. This was a complete role reversal from 2 years earlier. In 2024, Ruse was the one finding answers under pressure. She was the one raising her level when the match mattered. In 2026, that dynamic had completely flipped. Every adjustment, every break point, every moment of tension now belonged to Eala. Think of it like a student who once failed an exam, walked away from it defeated, and then, years later, sits down to take the exact same test again. Except this time, the studying actually happened. The gaps in preparation are gone. The questions that once looked impossible now look almost routine. The final grade is not close. It is a completely different level of understanding on display. That is what this scoreline represents. Not revenge as a feeling, revenge as a measurable, visible skill gap that simply did not exist 2 years earlier. And here is where I need you to actually think about what you just watched, because I want to know something before we go any further. Down in the comments, tell me honestly, before this match, did you think Eala's growth over these 2 years was this dramatic? Or did this scoreline surprise you as much as it surprised the crowd inside that stadium? I am genuinely curious how many people saw this level of transformation coming. Because the story does not end with a dominant scoreline. It ends in a way that nobody predicted. And that ending reveals something about where Eala actually stands right now that goes far beyond one match against one opponent from her past. Here is how the match actually ended. Not with a final ace, not with a match point converted on Eala's racket. The scoreboard read 6-1, 3-0 inches her favor when play was suspended for lightning. Ruse had already called for a medical timeout earlier in that second set to have her right ankle taped. When the weather cleared and the courts were ruled safe again, Ruse did not come back out. She retired from the match with the injury. Now, some people watching that result might reduce it to a footnote, an asterisk, a win that came by walkover instead of a final winner. That reaction misses the point entirely, because a scoreline of 6-1, 3-0 was not manufactured by an injury. It was already decided before Ruse ever called for that medical timeout. The injury did not create the gap between these two players. It simply stopped the match from confirming a result that was already obvious. This win did something specific. It evened the head-to-head between Eala and Ruse at one match apiece. But more importantly, it added one more name to a list that keeps getting longer. Zarazua, Joint, Swiatek, Jung, Fernandez, Pegula, Parks, Now Ruse. Every single opponent who ever beat Alex Eala once has since lost to her in a rematch. Every single one. And this win did not happen in isolation. It is one data point inside a stretch of tennis that is genuinely historic for Philippine sport. Rewind to the end of 2025. World ranking 53. No tour-level title to her name. Now, fast forward through this single season. A first WTA Tour title in Washington, won by defeating tournament top seed Jessica Pegula in the final. A climb into the top 20 of the world rankings, the first Filipina in history to reach that mark. A career-high seed of number 17 at a WTA 1000 event, the exact seeding she carried into Cincinnati. Season prize money that has already crossed $1.5 million, from 53 inches the world to top 20. From 0 tour titles to a champion who beat a top American star to get her first one. From an unseeded player at most tournaments to the 17th seed at one of the biggest events on the calendar. That is not gradual improvement. That is a complete transformation of what this athlete is capable of, compressed into a single season. And here is a number almost nobody outside dedicated tennis coverage is talking about right now. At this exact moment, Alex Eala sits just 18 ranking points behind Sorana Cirstea for the number 17 spot in the world. 18 points. That is close enough that a single good result in her very next match could push her into a new career high ranking before she even reaches the semifinals of this tournament. Which brings us to what comes next. Waiting for Eala in the following round is Amanda Anisimova, 9th seed, world number 10. An American star who has never faced Eala before in her career. Anisimova herself addressed the matchup directly, saying she has heard how popular Eala is, that she expects the crowd to be intensely loud, and that she is bracing herself for what she called a very packed stadium. Think about what that means. A top 10 player, someone with far more experience at the top of the sport than Eala currently has, is publicly preparing herself not just for the tennis, but for the atmosphere that follows Alex Eala wherever she plays. That is not the kind of statement opponents make about a rising player. That is the kind of statement opponents make about someone who has already arrived. The Ruse match closed one chapter. A 2-year-old loss finally answered. But it opened something bigger. A direct path toward the top 16 inches the world. A first-ever meeting with a top 10 opponent, and a tournament draw that, according to multiple reports, could eventually require Eala to face as many as 5 different Grand Slam champions if she keeps advancing. The question is no longer whether Alex Eala belongs at this level. The scoreline against Ruse already answered that. The real question is how far this version of her can actually go. 2 years ago, Gabriela Ruse was the player who closed a door on Alex Eala. She ended a Grand Slam dream before it even had the chance to begin. Today, Eala was the one who walked off that Cincinnati court victorious, while Ruse was the one who could not continue. But zoom out for a second, because this story was never really about one rematch. It was about what that rematch reveals. A player who once lost to 7 different opponents has now beaten every single one of them back. A player who started this season ranked 53rd in the world is now sitting 18 points away from cracking the top 16. A player who grew up hitting balls on a crushed seashell court in Manila is now the reason WTA tournaments are rewriting their food menus and rethinking their court assignments, because nobody expected this level of demand for one athlete from the Philippines. That is bigger than tennis. Alex Eala is not just climbing a ranking list right now. She is changing how an entire sport thinks about where its next superstar can come from. And she is doing it while carrying the weight of an entire diaspora that sees itself in every point she wins. The road ahead does not get easier from here. Waiting in the next round is Amanda Anisimova, a top 10 player who has already admitted she is bracing herself for what happens when Eala steps on court. Beyond that, this draw is reportedly stacked with as many as 5 Grand Slam champions between here and the final. And somewhere down that same road, later this month, sits the US Open. the exact tournament where Gabriela Ruse first denied Eala her main draw debut 2 years ago. So, here is where this story leaves us. Not with an ending, but with a much bigger question hanging in the air. Can this version of Alex Eala, the one who just dismantled a former conqueror in barely half a match, actually make a real run through one of the toughest draws of her career? Amanda Anisimova already knows she is coming. The only question left is whether you will be watching when it happens. Subscribe now. Because this story is moving fast, and the next chapter could be the biggest one yet.